guess this is the follow-up to our Bible Says What series with Bible Says we left the pearl clutching in the summer, and we found out that the Bible is pretty scary this morning. Seriously, those Christians who are against celebrating Halloween because they think it's satanic, they don't like monsters and demons, I wonder if they've read the Bible, because that was demonic and weird. How about this one? And thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body, the flesh of thy sons and thy daughters, which the Lord thy God hath given thee in the siege and in the straitness, wherewithin thine enemies shall distress thee. That's in all of King James gory glory, right out of Deuteronomy. Nothing like cannibalism, right? And then there's the book of Daniel. Daniel saw in my vision by night the four winds of heaven stirring up the great sea, and the four great beasts that came out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. And then as I watched, the wings were plucked off and lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a human being, where a human mind was given to it. And another beast appeared, a second one, a bear, raised up on one side with 3 tusks in its mouth and its teeth. Arise, devour many bodies. Scary, right? This is scary. And then, of course, there's always the book of Revelation, as we know. So much frightening, detailed imagery. The end of days, which will begin with its descent upon humankind after a massive earthquake has moved all the islands, the mountains, and reduces humanity to hiding in caves. 7 angels with trumpets raising all sorts of hell. This is scary, this Bible of ours. And so this morning we get another scary sight here with the text of Ezekiel. And it's always good for a fright. Ezekiel is really filled with some great scary imagery. Today we get this description of a fiery cloud that's flashing with 4 creatures that looked human, only they had these 4 faces and 4 wings, and they were like human and lion and ox and eagle, and it's so scary. And they come to devour bodies like in Daniel, and you're just waiting for this to happen. It's all zombies and fiery creatures and them bones they sing about today. These are visions of hell. Well, these books are not like the rest of the Bible, as you can imagine. We know the Bible's weird, but we often avoid the really scary parts too. Halloween, I'd say, has nothing on the Bible. You get beasts and fire and devouring bodies, arising bodies, like the zombies that come out. And they go head to head with any of the scary Halloween monsters we see out there. It's a nightmare. And in reality, they really are nightmares. That's what these books are. They are dreams. They are visions. They're odd and strange and scary, but they were not descriptions of actual things or actual monsters. If you'll recall, when we learned this summer, we talked about what apocalyptic literature is. They use these revelations to display a coded language and a coded message. So we don't really read a lot of apocalyptic literature here. That's probably because we associate it with people who believe that the world is coming to an end, right? Is that just me? But then these days, it's kind of like everything's flipped. Now we're the ones who believe the world is coming to an end, and they're the deniers. Things have gotten kind of strange. But the problem, of course, isn't this literature itself. It's usually the interpretation. So I think we hear too many people who do interpret this stuff literally, and then we just turn it off so we don't read it unless we're doing a weird series like a spooky Sunday celebration or the series we did last summer. But I think that's actually how a lot of people feel about Christianity, that it's so literal and it doesn't make sense, so they just turn it off. walk away, right? Don't read it, don't listen to it, don't talk about it. They're all crazy, so they leave. But like all of our biblical literature, the Bible isn't written about this day and age. These apocalyptic writings were not written about our day and age either, but we can find meaning in this scripture when we do the work to find out what it meant in its day and time and then apply it to our day and time. So it should be obvious, but it may not be. Apocalyptic literature is not written when times are good. People are not happy or prosperous or at peace. It's written during difficult times, times that are so bad that the only thing they can do is write in code. It's the best way to convey a message of hope over and against all the messages of chaos and destruction that are being conveyed everywhere else. So the book of Ezekiel that we're looked at today comes to us from 593 to 571 BCE, before the Common Era. But it may not actually come till later in the 4th century. It sounds like the book of Revelation, so some of that imagery sounds really familiar to what we've read before, because Revelation basically is the New Testament version of this Hebrew text. Revelation, as we talked about this summer, is really about Christians who were persecuted because they refused to worship the emperor. And so it relies heavily out of this text of Ezekiel. There's rarely direct quotes, but we can see a literary relationship to Ezekiel. They're undeniably connected. Today, when we hear the word apocalypse, when we talk about apocalyptic literature, usually when we hear apocalypse, we think of what? This end of the earth. That some cataclysmic thing is going to happen that's going to blow everything up. It's like sci-fi or something, like scenes from Left Behind, right? By the way, I have to thank Pastor Rachel because she told me about rapture parties and rapture drills that actually exist. I had no idea. They exist as a way for people to prepare. So I guess some of these folks realize that there's a possibility that not everybody in the family will get raptured, and so not everyone's going to get beamed up, and those who are left will have to figure out what to do when their parents are suddenly absent. So they have these like rapture parties with rapture drills. You have to ask Pastor Rachel about it. It's a great way to get in relationship with her. But I have to admit, I'm intrigued. So anyhow, but the word apocalypse, as we've said, has been misinterpreted over the years. We learned this summer, apocalypse means uncovering. It means a disclosure of knowledge or a revelation. So it is about revealing something, knowledge that has been hidden. So of course, if we aren't already clear, the spoiler alert here is there are not real monsters. Hence, we need not be afraid of the physical demons and the monsters and these crazy illustrations of winged animals with multiple heads. In actuality, these monsters are often coded representing different kingdoms or empires that were reigning upon the earth. So in the book of Daniel, the monsters were likely to be the 4 kingdoms of Babylon, Media, Persia, and Greece. The book of Revelation, as we know, is referencing Rome. And here in Ezekiel, they're writing about the coming judgment of those who are remaining in Jerusalem. But in reality, for those of us here, I think that we're not all that far removed from apocalyptic monsters, because if we understand the metaphor, we recognize that our world can also be symbolized in this very literature, even if it's not written about us. It's not written about us. But in so many ways, we can see our own day and time written into it. So we're celebrating this Spooky Sunday, and it's not because of necessarily our fears of ghosts and vampires and multi-headed monsters, but because we recognize that there are scary things in the world and it's okay to address them. It's getting played out in our country in ways that are absolutely frightening. Today, I'm dressed as joy, but we joked in my family I'd be better off dressing as anxiety because that's what I've got. I'd almost rather be reading about these texts of monsters or terrified by the demons that our more fundamentalist friends are concerned about, because the reality is our own political landscape today is frightening. But we know that all of this literature was written for people about their political landscapes and the way they faced the world before them. So if monsters are representative of powers that oppress, I'm not going to have to tell you. You can make the very connections that the people who originally read their texts made about the monsters of their day. But the reality is that these monsters are scary. And I'm frightened. I'm not going to pretend that I'm not. I'm not going to say I don't have a pit in my stomach and fear in my heart. I have to be honest. There's a part of me that does feel like there is an apocalyptic battle for good and evil going on here. And I don't want to demonize people in our world, our fellow citizens. I don't think that really gets us anywhere. But it does feel like this election is more important because we know what's at stake. We recognize the polarization in our world. We've lost common ground. I don't know if we ever had a shared, similar, same perspective, but I do believe there was a shared belief in what facts are. Now, or back then, right, we thought that SNL and The Onion were funny because we all understood satire. But for this last decade, there are things that might initially make us laugh because it seems so ridiculous that these impossible, ludicrous things must have been written for a television show or a satirical newspaper, but they're real. And collectively, we don't have enough in common to think the same way about what is absurd or vile or beyond the pale of inappropriate anymore. And my gut reaction is still to laugh at the absurdity until I realize this is reality and I shudder with fear. What's going to happen, I wonder, as I stay up late, not in joy, but in anxiety? Will there be another insurrection at our Capitol? What will the Supreme Court do? Will my friends and family be safe? You could say, well, we made it before, but in reality, we're just beginning to see the lasting repercussions that continue on today. What will happen to the vulnerable among us? What about the military, an already militarized police force? What will they have license to do, and to who? What will the rest of the world do? These questions keep me up late at night. In the past, I thought my fears were hyperbolic, and now it seems like everything is on the table. It's scary. Is it okay to admit that? I mean, we're not supposed to be afraid, right? Because we've got God on our side. We're Christians. God's got this. Bad theology alert. Let me get back to that in a moment, because first I want to circle back to why this day does matter. Why it does matter that we have a spooky Sunday, even that we're dressed up in silly costumes. Because I think we should be able to embrace Halloween in church. There are Christians who really are against this. They think this is Satan's holiday, as if they don't actually get off on invoking fear, but they like to be in control of that fear, right, of imposing that fear. But I think it's not a bad thing. I think it's actually important that we do something like this, that we celebrate Halloween. I think it's important that we face the fright, that we do so with some levity to show kids and grown-ups that we can face fears. Those folks that are so afraid of Halloween because it's tempting Satan, or as some actually say, worshiping Satan. I mean, come on, where do they think God is? I mean, what does it say about their theology? Not in scary places? I think it's valuable for us to be able to be vulnerable enough to admit that we have fears. I think it's okay for us to name that these are uncertain times. But that's really unsettling in a culture that always has control. And if we're not, well then, I guess that's why we must embrace a theology where God is in control if it's not us. And that way we can control God and we can control the narrative. This God's always on our side stuff, so we will always win. Get behind me, Satan. But God forbid, don't tempt him by celebrating Halloween. That's what I mean about bad theology. This God on our side stuff. God's going to take care of us. God is going to take care of us, but we'll get back to that later. But this idea that we have to demonize the other, that if we admit our fear, we must also admit that we're worried. Is God on our side? We're worried that the monsters will win if we don't win. So we must be certain that we'll win in the end. So we get a ticket, to heaven, so we don't burn in hell. But a more progressive theology can let go of that. We can let go of the ownership of God, the fear of this literal demon or Satan, that a holiday could somehow conjure him or force us to worship him, thereby betraying God. That would really make God mad, right? Put the fear of God in you. And sometimes that's the point. Rather than recognize that it's okay to feel scared sometimes. Halloween allows children the opportunity to learn that you can face fears. Why not address it in a controlled environment? Because so much of the world is uncontrolled. It's hard to let go of theologies of control. We know that, though. Those who have lived through hell on earth already know that there are certain things that are out of our control. Certain things that are even out of God's control. That's a scary thing to say. But it doesn't mean that God's not going to take care of us, that God's going to abandon us. It doesn't mean that God is absent in hell. That's kind of why I don't believe in a literal hell, because I don't understand that there could be a place where God would send souls to burn while God then lives and reigns in a kingdom in the clouds, locked behind pearly gates with streets of gold in some heaven light years away. We missed our song this morning. So I don't believe that hell is a place you go to be punished when you die, but I do believe that there are situations where earth becomes a living hell because of injustice, inhuman acts of injustice, or injustice of illness cast without rhyme or reason. Hell on earth does exist, and these situations of fear and suffering are real. But there isn't a place where God doesn't exist. God is in the fear, not behind it. Whether it's this living hell that God exists all over the world right now, Gaza, fear of school shootings, cancer, addiction, domestic violence, the most frightening of all situations. In the places where God seems the most absent, that's actually where God is. So I think there's nothing wrong with saying we're afraid. It's okay to admit that we can't control it all and we feel scared. So if you're like me and you're feeling anxious, nervous about the days to come, whatever way the election goes, there's fears before some of us at least. No, you're not alone. You're not. Because God is with us, at one with us, and we're in this together. I don't know what's going to happen in the United States. I don't know what's going to happen in our world. The people of Gaza, the people that I love who are fighting cancer and other illnesses. All of that lack of control is so frightening. But what I do know is that apocalyptic literature was about resistance. It was about finding those who are like-minded and like-hearted to bind together in unity, to find strength even when we feel like we are outnumbered or outpowered, to name real fears, but in doing so, to face them with hope. We don't know what's going to happen, but we know that we can address evil in our world by resisting it. We can work to try to eradicate the places where hell exists, to do what we can to be the change, and to seek calm serenity when we find ourselves powerless. A very scary place to be. Even when we lack control or knowledge of outcome, we are not alone. And perhaps this is what we do together as a community. We face the monsters of our world, the things we don't have control of. And we don't expect God to fix them or fight them. But we believe, we know, we feel a connection to God with us, God in us. In us. We are part of the creative force of love, the stiller of storms. That though the winds may rage and the lightning flash, the monsters gnash, we have hope. And in that, there is so much power. We have the strength of community gathering us in the divine presence of a peace that passes all understanding. And so in the face of monsters, have hope. You are not alone. Amen.